Welcome to the Clean Power Hour Live. I'm Tim Montague, your co-host. Today is May 11th, 2023. We have a special show today. We have Brian Grenko from VDE Americas joining us to talk about technology risk and risk mitigation for solar developers and asset owners. Check out all of our content at cleanpowerhour.com. Give us a rating and a review on Apple and Spotify so that others can find this content. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have a wonderful channel bringing you 2 episodes a week, one pre-recorded interview and this live show that I do with my co-host John Weaver. Before we get into the show, I want our listeners to know that the show is brought to you by Chint Power Systems, CPS America, maker of North America's #1 3-phase string inverter with over 6 gigawatts shipped in the US. With a focus on commercial and utility scale solar and energy storage, the company partners with customers to provide unparalleled performance and service. CPS America product lineup includes 3-phase string inverters from 25 kW to 275 kW, exceptional data communication and controls, and energy storage solutions designed for seamless integration with CPS America systems. CPS America has offices in California, New Jersey, and Texas. Learn more at chintpowersystems.com. With that, I want to welcome the commercial solar guy, my co-host John Weaver, to the show. Welcome, John.
So, Tim, you were going to say that the Clean Power Hour is brought to the Clean Power Hour by the Clean Power Hour.
That's right.
And that would have been funny, but it is. It is
it's
brought
an
to the
infinite loop, John.
And it's because, and everybody, Tim works very hard at doing these podcasts, and he pays money out of his pocket so that you people can get some awesome solar news. So when you see Tim, say, thank you very much, Timothy. We appreciate your Clean Power Hour.
I would like to give you a shout out, John. You also do a hard job bringing us the news and writing all those wonderful articles for PV Magazine. If you're not familiar with John Weaver, just Google John Weaver and you'll see he's penning several articles a week for PV Magazine USA. So, John, what is it with hail and technology risk? Like, why is this guy Brian Grenko here today?
Well, you know what? Do you want to show the picture that I found? We found on LinkedIn this morning from Emily. I posted it on our document if you want to grab it there.
Yeah, but that's a good introduction for Brian. But let's let Brian tell our audience exactly who are you, Brian Grenko, and what is it that VDE Americas is up to?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, guys, and I appreciate the opportunity to be on the show. Thanks for the invite. Just maybe a little bit about VDE Americas. Most people kind of associate VDE as kind of like the UL of Europe. I mean, VDE as an organization is in the business of developing product test standards and then testing products against those standards. But we also do advisory services, and so we're actually celebrating 10 years in the U.S. this year, and our main clients are solar power and storage developers and financial institutions that are providing investment to projects. So generally speaking, we perform either as an independent engineer or owner's engineer to support project financing. And the scope of our work entails reviewing documents, project documents and major contracts, the major equipment, site studies, and what we really bring to the table is a lot of the performance modeling and the production assessment, understanding how much production the plants will generate over the course of their useful life.
Indeed. It's very important stuff, right? Because if a project isn't producing what it was expected to, then somebody's in trouble, and we don't like that in the solar industry, right? We have enough challenges getting stuff built. Once it's built, you want it to run smoothly and as expected and generate that cash flow for everyone involved. So I think we should, though, dive into some of the nitty-gritties of this work, like weather risk, which is an increasing hazard for all of us humans and for solar panels, because storms, fires, floods, drought's not so much a problem for solar. Luckily, not all natural disasters have a negative impact on solar. We just need some more global cooling, I guess, though. That would be a good thing too.
So we chatted in the pre-show about hail. I saw a picture online somewhere. People were having like 2-inch hail. I know the probabilities on that are lower. We have a picture we're going to share eventually. Emily O'Leary, she does recycling of solar panels. I always like her pictures from the site. She showed just this morning some hail damage on a site. Brian, you mentioned that there are tools to mitigate hail, and one of those is your tracker. I've also heard about having, yeah, there's the pictures. That's on LinkedIn. And another is I've heard of thicker glass that's in other areas. So how do you defend against hail? Like what's number one defense?
Yeah, let me maybe start off by kind of elaborating a little bit. I've been in solar since 2001. Used to work for Astor Power. So for those of you guys who have been in the industry for a long time may remember Astor Power, the solar module manufacturer, spin-off the University of Delaware. But yeah, the bottom line is back then we were only building renewable energy, like solar plants in California and maybe Arizona, Hawaii places. Those were the only places that economically could really kind of support the industry. But over the past 10 years, especially the last 5 years, we've really been building solar projects, utility scale solar projects all over the country. And lo and behold, a lot of those projects are being built in places like West Texas because of the needs of ERCOT and throughout this whole swath of the country where we get a lot of hail damage. And a few years ago, there was a utility scale project that experienced a severe hail storm event that knocked out over like 30% or so of the system capacity. And it was covered by insurance, but that was a $70 million insurance claim. And since then, yeah, what we've observed is a significant hardening of the insurance market has become a real challenge for project developers who, in some cases today have to kind of like self-insure. So as I mentioned, VDE, we're really all about identifying and mitigating technical risk, and that includes catastrophic risk. And so what we found was at the time, nobody had really developed a way to actually quantify hail risk. And first of all, I think most folks know that PV modules are certified to withstand a certain amount of hail, but typically that certification is done with 1-inch hail. But what we're talking about when we talk about severe hail is we're talking about like over 2-inch hail, 2-inch hail, 3-inch hail.
Yeah.
I mean, the world record for hail is like 8 inches, and that was
found.
I think that was found somewhere in South Dakota. I've been working on a project in South Dakota, so I mean, it's really kind of interesting. But anyway, to answer your question, John, and what we ended up doing is we worked with Professor John Allen at Central Michigan University. He's one of the country's foremost experts on hail and severe weather events. And we've developed a product that kind of integrates radar history with spotter, publicly available spotter data. That what we're able to do is we're able to recognize radar patterns, and from that data, provide customers with an expected return interval for different size hail events. So if you're a developer, if you're an investor and you want to understand, hey, what's my risk of a hail event occurring at the site? We can tell you what that return interval is. And considering solar plants have like a 35 to 40 year useful life expectation, it's really, really important. And then that's the first stage. And then the second stage, of course, is depending on how you design your system, you can really mitigate that risk. So if you have a tracking system that can stow, that's obviously advantageous. And also, there's companies that provide hail alert services. So we work with customers to try to not only identify what the risk of an event is, like a hail event, but then how can you mitigate that risk?
And is thicker glass on your solar panels one of your purchase prices, one of your potentials?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. I mean, some of our clients, in addition to project developers, we work with a lot of the tracking manufacturers. We work with module manufacturers as well to help them understand the risk. We're aware, I mean, there's different types of module configurations, right? There's glass on glass modules, so double glass modules. And then there's also the conventional modules that may have thicker glass, but just, one light of glass, like it's a super straight, they've got a back sheet. So yeah, we have seen differences in those types of technologies, and we are aware that some folks have been investigating thicker glass, like specifically for those locations where you could potentially expect more hail events.
It's only being investigated then. It's not like a common practice to just have thicker glass. Okay. Well,
that photo came from Emily O'Leary, and she asked the question or made the point that your solar modules might be under warranty and be replaced, but is the recycling of the broken solar modules covered? So that's also a growing concern is what happens with the broken modules, and they could be many in the event of a large hail event. But so I don't know if you have a comment about that, Brian.
Well, yeah, I think that likely folks don't necessarily consider those costs. I mean, generally speaking, when you're developing a project, you are considering the decommissioning costs, and part of that solar module, removal and recycling. But people are, of course, assuming that there's not going to be some sort of severe hail event that leads to a premature, you know, pull out of half of the modules or something like that. So I'd say that those costs are probably not generally integrated into the financial assumptions for sure.
And what percentage of the tracker manufacturers? I mean, we have a handful of very large tracker makers like Nextracker and Array Technologies. Are they actually tracking the storms with their at the individual array level? Is that now common to do that, and so that they could put the array in stow position before the hail hits?
Yeah, so I think that the key today, Tim, is for a project for asset owners and operators to have a hail alert system. Because depending on approaching radar, you can generate an alert that would go to the system operator so that they can properly execute a hail stow command. And look, the tracker manufacturers of all, generally speaking, have stepped up their game quite a bit over the last couple of years to enable that stow functionality and to give it priority. There's some differences between the various tracking manufacturers that are out there for sure, but certainly I think all have kind of come to recognize the importance of having hail stow. And so that's been, I think what we're seeing now is that is being integrated more into the product design. So that trackers can stow away from the wind, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the array will have a weather station on it, so the array knows, okay, in real time, what's the wind doing? And there is, of course, major wind hazard too when you're in a hurricane zone like the Gulf of Mexico. But beyond that, like a hailstorm, you wouldn't know until the hail's hitting, maybe. And I do think Nextracker even has some nuances, like they can detect when there's snow on the ground, to anticipate, having to put the array in full tilt to try to get the snow from piling up on the array and those kinds of things. So I like to say that these hardware companies really are software companies and cloud computing companies, even though they make steel or steel and et cetera. So anyway, is there any kind of a signal you get though on breakage and the type of module? Like does a traditional polycrystalline PV cell survive better than thin film, or vice versa?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, once you are over 2-inch hail, you start to break glass. So in some ways, it doesn't really matter what the technology is underneath. But certainly there's different advantages for different technologies. That one of the issues with the conventional silicon solar cell design is that if you develop a crack, potentially have more of an area that is no longer activated, after that crack forms. And so that's partially why we're seeing more bus bars in recent years. We're seeing half cells and third cells to try to mitigate that. The design of for solar module, for instance, it's much more. It's able to kind of absorb that threat much just by nature of how the circuitry is done, because it's just fundamentally a different technology. So yeah, different technologies have kind of different response to hail. That's one of the things that we typically advise clients on.
Yep.
So you mentioned in an email sent that you do technical analysis of hardware, risk analysis of hardware for customers, and you'll review specs, manufacturers. Tim was just talking about software, and it reminded me of the NEC, but not the NEC code people. So maybe it's different. The North American Electricity Standard Commission, or Reliability Commission, something like that. NERC, maybe it is. And they did a report where they had this, they call it the Odessa event, where a fossil facility tripped. And that tripping led to funniness going through the power lines, voltage drops that also tripped output at a few utility scale solar plants. And then these solar plants, some of them had challenges coming back up. And the issue with like half of them was lacking passwords and basic setting changes in the inverter software, and half of that was because manufacturers had gone out of business. So when you do risk analysis in our fast-moving solar world, where do you see the biggest hardware risks? And coming from a guy that sold a Cylindra plus SatTech project in 2000, late 10. 6 months later, both companies are BK. The project still works perfectly, by the way. In New Bedford, Massachusetts, Jeff Glassman owns Darnit. He's got 200-ish kW of Cylindra on the roof. But they both went out of business. How do you guys look at companies and software that's very, it needs constant love and attention? How do you define risk in inverters from that way?
Yeah, I should give a shout out to my buddy Matt Murphy over at CEO at Greenbacker. He's kind of harped on this for a long time, forever, about firmware updates and folks typically not accounting for the need to budget for new software and software development, firmware updates, and IT systems just over the course of a project. That's something that's often overlooked. We do look at software. We look probably more specifically at hardware because, like, if you take, for instance, like SCADA systems are uniquely designed for generally every project that you have, at least for in the utility scale game. And so that's part of our scope of work is to kind of review the SCADA system. But I think really to kind of address your point about the technology risk of companies going away, one of the biggest things that we, in my opinion, that we look at, that I think oftentimes that we recognize and identify that folks don't necessarily do a good enough job of doing is identifying the critical spare parts. And it's not just the major equipment, but it's also the balance system. And so, that's a way that I think a lot of folks are try to save money is by kind of skipping on the spare parts. And also, it's not just about the original spare parts that you're procuring during the construction phase, but it's also about how many spare parts and like what's the policy for replacement of spare parts, and how do you budget for spare parts and major equipment refurbishment down the line from an OpEx standpoint. I mean, we see that a lot. I mean, one of the challenges in our industry is I think folks generally under budget for their inverter replacement costs, and it's something that's unfortunately we just see it kind of almost across the board, and it's become what we worry about is these projects where down the road they don't have necessarily the funds, and it becomes kind of like, I don't know, I want to say a black eye for the industry, but certainly a concern. And then again, just going back to the situation that you talked about, it sounds almost like a science fiction movie, the Odessa event, and leading to blackouts. I mean, I think that generally speaking, for utility scale solar projects, it's similar to conventional energy. I mean, they're held to requirements where they need to have power factor response, frequency response, so that the utility can kind of regulate the solar plants with the grid that can kind of fluctuate from different types of events, from curtailment, from overloading, from other projects potentially shutting down and influencing the grid. So I think that there's nothing really different about solar other than the fact that it's what we call asynchronous, right? Because solar plants won't operate the same if a cloud goes over them or when the sun goes down, and the same can be said for wind because it's the wind's not always blowing, and in that way it's different from like gas speakers. But that's why BESS integration has become so prominent in recent years and will continue to do so. So I think that the bottom line is solar plants are resilient, but there's so much that goes into the planning and construction of those plants that it's important to have independent folks like us review and make sure all the boxes are appropriately checked.
I'm glad you mentioned Matt Murphy. at Greenbacker. I hope you can twist his arm for me. We're trying to get him to come on the show. And,
He's a busy guy.
Yeah, he is a busy guy. But he wants to tell we need to tell the Greenbacker story. They're an asset owner, and they're dealing with these problems day in and day out, right? And they've broken into the 100 megawatt scale projects now. Historically doing small utility and community solar projects or owning. So let's talk a little bit about some other aspects of solar facilities related to your work, though, at VDE, like capacity testing and overall performance. What are you seeing, and what are the challenges that asset owners face? Say hello to Ginger also. She's paying us a visit.
Okay. Hey, hi, Ginger. So, yeah, that's a great question, Tim. I mean, one of the challenges that I think is across our industry, whether you're the EPC contractor, you're the owner that's developing the asset, or if you're an engineering firm like us trying to confirm that the plant is meeting modeled expectations. I mean, that's really what it's about. We operate what's called a capacity test. The challenge is, like, if you think about solar panels, they're all tested under standard test conditions. So every solar panel that's tested in the factory is subjected to the exact same conditions when it's tested from one factory to the next. So you kind of know what you're getting when you're buying the modules. But when you think about, how do we evaluate a solar plant, and how do we know if the solar plant is operating as it's expected to operate? Well, the expectations come from our modeling and using software like PVSys to predict what the performance will be. But then that plant, you never know when you're testing it after you've constructed it, what the irradiance conditions, like how much sunlight is available, what's the temperature, what's the wind speed, how do I know that my sensors are measuring everything accurately in the plane of array, and compiling into the issue is the fact that the procedure that we use, the capacity test, there are literally hundreds of variations of the capacity test that's all based on this ASTM standard, but require just a slightly different analysis. And it makes it very challenging for everybody to really understand if a plant is operating the way that it should be. And there's a whole cottage industry that's been created for consultants that are generally only doing capacity tests. And that's great, but that tells me that there's too much complexity, that we need to do a better job to kind of simplify the process. Because one of the problems and challenges that we see is because of this complexity, and we see I kind of joke that there's often two types of folks that run capacity tests. There's people that don't know what they're doing, and there's people that cheat. And they're able to cheat because they know how to work the system. And so that's just problematic. I mean, we don't want to see that. We want to make sure that there's, kind of a fair test and that people are following the process in a fair way, because the most important thing we can do is to make sure the project is performing as expected on day one. If you want to make sure that your asset's going to perform over the 40, 35-year, 40-year useful life, the most important thing we can do is make sure it's performing on day one. And so, yeah, it's the capacity test is how we do that. And there's a lot of challenges. And I know you had Dan Leary on the show recently. I mean, he's done a great job trying to automate the capacity test. He has a great hardware and software kind of combination that he puts out, especially great for smaller systems where maybe weather station pricing is a little bit more of a concern. For utility scale projects, you're probably going to get the best sensors that you can possibly get. But I really like Dan's product. I think it's really perfect for the small utility space.
You're referring to Dina Watts and
Dina Watts.
Yep.
That's
so
right.
Shout out to Dan Leary at Dina Watts. He's also a sponsor of the show, and I like to say Dan is the best kept secret in the solar industry. More people need to know about Dina Watts. If you're in the business of asset ownership, check out Dina Watts. But you said something that really bothered me, and about the two types of people. And it seems to me like if you're doing a capacity test, you're being paid to give some level of objective opinion, right, about what's going on with an array, because there's a lot of things at stake. There's the quality of the workmanship, the construction work, the quality of the parts and pieces being used in the facility, and perhaps the quality even of the initial model of the project. But can you say a little more about that? Like you said that capacity testing needs to be made simpler. Okay, so is that an ASTM thing? We need to hound them to simplify the process. Um, I think this is an area that people don't understand very well.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Well, at the risk of sounding too controversial, I mean, maybe the first place to start is to say that there is an IEC, IEC, there's a lot of IEC standards, and there is an IEC committee that is working on this issue, that's trying to kind of advance ASTM 2848 to perhaps, improve it, make it more simple. There, to some extent, the challenge is you want the test to be a little bit flexible, because if you're running the test in the wintertime versus the summertime, you need to have the ability to potentially cater the test to the conditions. I'll give you a perfect example. In the wintertime, if you're building a plant in Michigan, and we've worked on a number of utility scale plants there, it's hard to find days where the solar irradiance gets above 400 watts per meter squared. But it's kind of understood within the solar industry that solar panel performance starts to become nonlinear when you get below, especially 300, 250 watts per meter squared, which basically means that if you're operating in that zone, it's not necessarily as indicative as you would normally be operating when you think, during the other times of the year. And so that's an area where it can be difficult to execute a capacity test in the wintertime because there's just not enough sunlight. That's just a fundamental challenge. You can't get Mother Nature to change the sun angle. That's just not something you can do. But going back to your question about the different folks, yeah, it's very stressful, because here's what's happening. You've got a project that's approaching substantial completion. Because it's approaching substantial completion, the owner wants to get the project funded. And so in order to get the project funded, it has to achieve substantial completion. Well, you typically can't achieve substantial completion without successfully passing the capacity test. So there's a pressure to pass the capacity test, but at the same time, that same owner, they do want to make sure that the system is operating the way that they want it to, because they're the ones that are going to be generating revenue from that. So they're kind of getting pressure from both sides. And then of course, if you're the EPC contractor and you have you're not going to get paid, you're not going to get your final payment until after you pass the capacity test and the punch list and things like that. So they're obviously very financially incentivized to pass the test. And after they construct it, they're looking forward, they've demobilized, they're looking forward to the next project. They want to get out. And so there's a lot of pressure to get this test done in a short period of time because there's a lot of money at stake. And that's unfortunately, that's some of the context here.
This is absolutely true. Right now, we're just finishing a 200 our money's much smaller, but we're finishing a 220-ish kW DC project, and we have an as-build to get signed off on. We have a meter socket to get a meter in from the utility, and each of these things we have to wait for, and there's different checks involved, and they're big chunky checks that are at the end of a project. And then of course we have a power production guarantee over the next X number of years, 5 years. And so there's a competing thing for me. I want to make sure the project works from the EPC or from the contractor, because we're the E and the P. And then I also want to make sure it works to cover me on the back end. So it's I don't want to spend more money because I want the project done. I found we have a broken module or two we have to replace. So that's money I'm spending. But at the same time, I need to spend that a little bit extra money so that over the next 5 years with my O&M responsibility, I don't have more money to spend. So KWH has a lot of articles coming out these days talking about us missing production numbers. KWH Analytics, pardon me, everybody. They sell an insurance put to help you guarantee output when you're financing products. But they've been saying that 6 to 8% 8% loss below everything, below projections, mostly due to inverter failures. Where do you see the biggest, post-mortem? You help a customer out, where are the failures that actually still occur? Is it inverters?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think you can necessarily point the finger at any one technology. Earlier you asked about different companies that kind of go out of business. I mean, we've definitely seen in the past that serial defects can kind of knock companies out of the space and cause them to fold, and that becomes an issue. Yeah, I mean, inverters can be problematic, but the same can be said about tracking systems and solar panels and other system components as well. And even occasionally there can be workmanship issues associated with the construction of the project. We've even seen we've seen issues with wire harnesses, for instance. I mean, that's not considered major equipment, but can be an Achilles heel of projects. I mean, if you have to replace your wire harnesses because you're getting ground faults, that's a very expensive thing to do, just simply because it requires a lot of labor, especially when you think about how a lot of systems are being designed these days.
What about connectors? Do you see a problem with connectors? Because I know that they've been a source of fires on some rooftop projects, well-publicized rooftop projects. What do you see with connectors?
Yeah, that's a great point, Tim. One of the things that we always check for, and I know a lot of our competitors do the same thing, is making sure that the module connectors are similar make and model as the connectors that are used for like the pigtails and other DC cabling, because that if there's a mismatch there, I mean, everybody likes to say that they're like MC4 compatible, but that's a term that's really just a marketing term. I mean, the bottom line is Staubli generally, the manufacturer of MC4 connectors, they generally don't they don't have a list of compatible products from other manufacturers, so that could be an issue, and that's true with whatever connector you have.
In our last minute together, Brian, what are one or two other things that asset owners really should be thinking about that you think that they're not thinking enough about?
Yeah, great question, Tim. One thing I definitely want to say is when you're designing an asset and you're going to finance that asset for 35 or 40 years, make sure that your design life is equivalent to that expectation. We see a lot of times, especially in the small utility space, when folks are buying tracking systems or mounting systems, when you think about the piers that are structural piers that are going into the ground, what those piers are going to corrode over time. I mean, we're building a lot of projects over former ag sites. That the soil at the former ag sites notoriously have corrosive soils that will eat away at the structural piers. And oftentimes we see, mounting systems with like a 20-year design life. Well, you can rip and replace string inverters. You can even remove modules pretty easily, but you can't rip and replace the structural piers without inducing just a ton of cost. And so what we see a lot is we see a disconnect between the design life of a system and then the useful life of the system. So then developers are forced to throw a ton of money into mitigation systems. And so the easiest way to avoid that is just to throw a little bit more money at the galvanization or at the post design. People don't want to do that because it brings cost up, but it's like, don't be penny wise and pound foolish. Think about how long your asset's going to perform when you design it.
Well said. Well, we'll look forward to having you back on the show sometime. Brian Grenko, Vice President of VDE Americas. I want to thank you so much for joining us to talk about technology risk and weather risk. This is really fascinating and very important. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks, Brian.
All right. Take care. All right. Very interesting conversation, John. I could talk all day to Brian Grenko.
I was quiet a lot because I just had to listen. Half because I'm like, oh my gosh, I hope we don't mess this up, and then the other half is, it's just listening and learning new stuff because everybody knows the science. Yeah, it's cool.
Yep. I'm right there with you. This is a lot of new territory, even for experienced solar professionals like ourselves. So let's get into the solar wind storage news of the week. We've got a little less than half an hour left. I want to give a shout out to my panelists yesterday. I hosted a webinar with Davi Wilson and Aaron Halimi. Davi is the former vice president of public affairs. And Aaron is the president of Renewable Energy Properties, a small utility developer in California. And we were talking about NIMBYism and how developers can prevent NIMBYism, not in my backyard. And basically the theme that emerged is do a better job, developers, of building a relationship with the local community. These are people, these are breadwinners, decision makers, taxpayers, and before they learn about a project because there's a public hearing, they should hear about your project because you're inviting them to sit down either over the kitchen table or in some group format. So really wonderful event with Aaron and Davi yesterday, which we'll be posting on our website, I think on March 30th. So we will be releasing the recording of that as a special episode of the Clean Power Hour. Apex Clean Energy. I couldn't remember where Davi was the former vice president. Apex and Renewable Energy Properties. And Apex is a real thought leader in this arena. They take a campaign approach. Think of a political campaign. So they treat projects like campaigns, and they prop up websites before a project is permitted. And then they maintain the website throughout the life of the website so that constituents can interact with the company about the project. And I think that is just an amazing and wonderful approach. So check that out when that comes out on the 30th. If you weren't there live, we had a good live audience as well. So John, what's our first story?
First story. I mean, we have a whole bunch of cool ones. I guess
we should talk about Texas probably, huh?
No. Let's start before that. Federal agents raided Grenko Solar's Florida factory. I don't know why. I saw it on Twitter, and
but we know why, right?
Well, so I'm only hypothesizing. I don't really know. I was thinking, trying to consider the only thing that could occur is that somebody brought solar cells from China and didn't declare them and didn't pay import taxes. That's all I got. Nothing else.
I mean, my gut tells me that there's probably some concern around the ULFPA, right?
Could be.
That Grenko is somehow using cells in their factory that were made in China using forced labor potentially. That's just a guess on my part. I agree. We don't really know. But is it a rare event that a module factory is investigated?
I've never seen a module factory get federal agents.
Yeah.
Never, not for me at least. You know, I've the only other time I remember of like the feds getting involved in a module maker was this company that was in Orlando, Florida, back in the late 2010s, and they made modules. They quote unquote made modules. They may have been called Blue Cell. Hope I don't get sued for that. But they were actually importing modules via Russia from China with no UL certification and faking it all, and they were selling it into Resi projects. And that's the only other time I know of a federal company or a module manufacturer getting investigated by feds. So that's it. My experience is limited. I'm very happy. That's FBI, Homeland Security, U.S. Customs. That's everybody visiting. So
Grenko has a 400 megawatt plant in Florida, and you know Grenko is a top-notch solar panel, and so we're happy to have Grenko in the U.S. with the module assembly plant. I don't know what Grenko's plans are to expand. I'm sure they are planning to expand in the U.S. like all the module makers right now. And
I think 100% of the output of this facility, or at least as it was originally signed, goes to NextEra.
Oh, really?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, that would make sense why it's in Florida then.
Correct.
A lot of utility scale solar happening in Florida. by NextEra, but of course NextEra is, in the top 3 largest solar developers and asset owners in the U.S., aren't they?
I think they're number one in the top 2 globally,
There you go.
behind
You just
maybe.
proved me wrong again.
Sorry.
It's all good. I'm just messing with you.
Sorry.
Uh,
They're also the biggest publicly traded utility in the country, in the United States as well. So I mean, they're
wow.
just a large company. They're 100 billion plus type
Yeah.
company. If you look at their stock thing, it just goes tut, 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 tut. Nice and consistent for like 10 years, 15 years. So yeah, that's what I thought was like an interesting thing. I don't know any details. I hope they get it worked out, and that's it. I don't know. That was the whiz bang headline
Did
title
the
thing
did
for the week.
did the truck stop rolling when that happened? I wonder, because that would be very painful for a factory if you can't keep the product shipping out of the
I'm
back
sure
door.
they do. I mean, if there's the feds investigating you, I don't think they let you. And in fact, the article said people were sent home, so
Mm,
I don't think there's
yeah,
employee activities ongoing, Tim.
yeah,
I have to say that there's some factory that's
that's
getting some project where people aren't working right now. So
that's a bummer.
yep.
Um, so we've got stories about California, Texas. SMA is opening a factory, and where though? I don't know the state.
Oh, I don't think it's in the United States. I think it's in Europe. I was just talking about the growth, and I wanted to bring it up, and just because I've been watching them, and plus they have a
Come on,
big
John. We're
backlog.
all about America here.
Oh, fine. SMA factory. SMA new factory. It might be a series of factories. I'm not certain. 20 gigawatt in Hesse, Germany. So sorry, America. The factory is in Germany because SMA is from Germany, and you're just gonna have to get over it.
You know, the
So
only major module factory in the U.S. or module maker inverter maker that makes inverters in the U.S. I think is Selectria. Uh,
let's see. Selectria. Yeah. Okay. They used to
yeah,
be in
but
Boston. They're in Chicago now.
yeah,
SMA
Buffalo
doesn't have
Grove,
something.
Illinois, Northern Illinois. Shout out to Selectria. They're
Yaskawa.
if you need a like to clear the military clearance, right? You use Selectria inverters on your project, right? Because it's tried and true, and
It's a good
but
product.
it's a little spendy. It's a little spendy. Um,
They
and
were
it,
purchased by a group named Yaskawa, which is a Japanese company, and so they moved their manufacturing and such facilities from Lawrence, Massachusetts, over to Illinois a
yeah,
couple
and for a
years
long
ago.
time they had a deep partnership with Chint Power Systems. I don't know what the status of that partnership is, but
Yeah.
um, so what's take your pick though. What's our next story here?
So I wrote a story about Ohm Analytics, who's pretty cool.
Oh,
I
nice.
actually met Chris, who's the founder of Ohm, I believe, or owner slash. I don't know the details, but he's the guy that shakes the hands. And
Okay, this is
he,
the California story.
yes, sir.
So
Yep.
what's the
And
title of the story, John?
what's the title? California Gold Rush might push residential market into growth. No, wait, the actual title: California Gold Rush supporting 2023 residential solar market.
There you go.
And the reason the
By
title,
none other than John Weaver.
John Fitzgerald Weaver, that's me. Hi, Mom. Uh, uh, it's a cool. I thought it was a neat story because I've been wondering what's going to happen in the residential market because I own a residential solar company, and we're very small, of course. But in the nation, we see interest rates going up, and interest rates going from like, from the feds from like 0.25% to 5% means that loans for residential solar are going to go up. And two groups are very dependent on loans. There's the fast money people who give you like a 20, 25-year loan and you save 10, 20, 30 bucks off your system, but you get a big tax credit. And then there's the folks like Sonova and Sunrun who have to pay for their money in a different way. Because then there's the cash people, and people who just get little loans on their own and pay for stuff in 5 years. Those people would be less affected. But these companies that give out the loans and the Sunruns, I've been wondering how they're going to be affected. And we see very clearly now that those who are dependent on loans are having more challenges because with the dealer fees and the interest rates going up, you find that a lot more loans are matching the electricity bill price. And when it's just a trade-off of one for the other, the sale works a lot less. Because, break even isn't as cool as saving $50, $100, $25, whatever it is. And so I'm just interested in seeing how the residential market's going out, if only for my own company. And there was some cool nuance.
Yeah, I mean, interest rates have definitely impacted the residential market a lot. I spoke to a couple module makers who, are like, yeah, sales are down because interest rates went up. So there's actually a bit of a glut of modules and module prices are falling. That's one of the reasons. There's other reasons, as we might talk about, but what exactly, I'm familiar with the name Ohm Analytics, but I'm not sure what they do. What does Ohm Analytics do?
They're a data analysis company who knows they're known for having great data on residential projects and permits. I think they have, and I've never used them.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I do know Ohm Analytics. Company out of San Diego, actually.
Yeah, and it's funny because I thought you told me about Ohm in the past, but
I
they
think
know
I did,
you.
yeah.
Yeah, you're the one that told me about Ohm Analytics.
I'd forgotten that I've spoken to Ohm several times, and
Yeah. And so they
I
just have smaller project data as their expertise, and I've seen them quoted in Bloomberg and other locations in different places in the past. So
right, they have a database on what's going on with projects. That's like their main thing, and so if you're a manufacturer, you want that data. You want to know where the stuff is happening, right? Who are the EPCs and developers developing projects so that you can target them and sell them modules, inverters, racking, or if you're trying to acquire projects.
I think that good data can really help companies have confidence in putting another human in a seat to do work. Because if you can have some data to really help you focus and work, it's great. And one thing I was talking to Chris about is if we were to, and this is one of the models that he does, they'll give data access to companies if you will give data about your projects, and they want to just have a better project database.
Yep.
And so the suggestion with us was, hey, we can tell you about people who are building, and we can tell you as much as we can about these people who own projects, and if they're anywhere near you, you can give them a call. And it's, I don't know, just as my company, we're trying to grow a little bit with a sales effort, and so one of the questions we have is who do you call? Do you just open up a phone book? One technique we did is that we're looking at power lines, we're looking at hosting capacity maps, and the power lines that are good, that we think we can put some on, we start calling the businesses on that street, because at least we've pre-vetted it on a hosting capacity interconnection level. So I don't know. I like data companies. I always like seeing the reports that come out with all the numbers, because then I can write articles for PV Magazine, and it always looks cool. And I have a whiz-bang headline, and I can say California Gold Rush, because that trope has not been played for 170 years. But
yeah, shout out to Chris Collins at Ohm Analytics. He's the founder, and we'll have to bring Chris on the show sometime. I would like to get him on the show as well. All right, you found a story about metal printing, a tipping point for 3D metal printing. This is a story in greenbiz.com by Heather Clancy. Siemens Energy and Surratt Technologies have a new formula for decarbonization math for additive manufacturing. I'm a huge fan of additive manufacturing. I think it makes a lot of sense, right? You have a lot less waste potentially if you get it right. The question is, can you make stuff that you used to make through other, like, CNC, can you make it as good as you can with other methods? But what's the breakthrough?
Well, from reading the article, it was very high level. So for me, I wasn't able to grasp. They said that they developed using a pointillist system, which allowed for them to do in hours or maybe a day what others are doing in days and weeks to build stuff. And the real key, the two items that caught my mind when I read, or caught my eye, my mind's eye, when I read this thing, was two pieces of information they communicated. And one of them was that they believed they would increase, or first off, that they thought they were 10 times faster than anybody else who's out there right now. I was like, wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Because I have a
Gets your
brother.
attention.
Yeah, exactly. That's number one. You're 10x faster. Wow, you're cool. Because I have a brother who works in 3D metal printing. He's in he lives in his shop's in Syracuse. It's called Vetted Tech, and they print all kinds of cool stuff. And every once in a while, I get to see pictures of neat things. And he's like, I made that, and it's like that's a chunk of metal that he 3D printed. The machines are like $1 million a piece. They got 4 or 16 lasers, something
How
like
do
that.
they? Okay, so they're melting the metal with lasers. I was going to say, how do they melt the metal at the tip of the printer head, right?
So it comes. So you have a big white box, and inside of it you have the printer bed, and there's lasers all around, and there's it's a metal powder that you load into the side, and the metal powder is laid out in a very thin sheet, and then lasers go zzz and melt it in its place, and then the next round the metal powder is wiped away, and new metal powder is laid out, and then the lasers come in and melt the next layer, and so it's added up slowly over time, layer by layer, in this particular metal unit. And so that's how my brother's does it. And anyway, so this company, first they said they're 10 times faster. Then the next thing they said is by 2025 they think they're going to be 100 times faster. The number one thing about 3D printing is that it's slow as heck. So 100 times faster means they're doing things in hours what people were doing in weeks, and that's super interesting to me. Well, 1 hour was, 100 hours is 4 days. So they're doing in an hour what people were doing in 4 days. That fundamentally changes the economics. And this is the second data point. They said that they're aiming for $125 per kilogram of print product by 2025, which means they're higher now. So maybe they're 5x, maybe they're $500, maybe they're $800, maybe they're $300, I don't know. And they believe that by 2030, they have a $25 per kilogram goal. So what my little head popped up was, does this print or does the 3D printing metal industry have a learning curve that is any way similar to, say, solar panels? For every doubling of solar capacity, the price of panels come down 20%. Is it for every doubling of 3D print capacity in the world, every million kilograms, 1 million kilogram? When it gets to 2 million, it'll drop. When it gets to 4 million, it'll drop 20%. Not as, but the iterations of making new machines and everything. So does the 3D printing world have a learning curve? It's Moore's law, of course, for chips. It's Solomon's law for solar panels. There's other people who have different observations within different industries where they see the learning curves occurring. So does the 3D printing? Then Tim, this is it. Our next guest. We need a 3D printing person, if you could.
Apparently,
Somebody.
you know one.
Well, yeah. Well, we should. I'm gonna reach out. Oh yeah, that's my brother. That's a good point. He doesn't know anything about learning curves. He knows about building products. He can talk to you about machines and cleaning them and all kinds of cool stuff. But so if you want that on the show, let me know. So yeah. So
Well,
3D printing.
If it's related to the energy industry, I'm curious. What applications there are. Like in rocketry, they're 3D printing rockets now, whole rockets.
Yeah.
Which is amazing. They're not seeing the same success as SpaceX, but they're getting off the launch pad anyway. Well, let's talk about Texas, because it was a big story this week.
Yep.
Texas Senate approves tight permit restrictions on solar and wind. Story by Ryan Kennedy. And, Texas is a beast of a wind and solar market. Texas is the number one wind market by volume, and the number two solar market, about to become the number one market. It's going to leapfrog California. What stood out, besides the story, which we'll get into here, the baseline though is to understand the market. There are 16 gigawatts of solar already in the ground and on rooftops in Texas, mostly ground mount, mostly utility scale. And there's 36 gigawatts planned over the next 5 years. those are big, big numbers, John. I mean, we only have 2 gigawatts in Illinois, and we're going to 12 in the next 10 years, I think. But we can't compete with Texas. But what happened in Texas? The Senate voted, and I mean, this is crazy town, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is a fossil fuel owned corrupt government. I mean, that's really fundamental to this. Uh, they're now, because they've had a few power grid failures, they recently decided to move toward paying 10 gigawatts worth of natural gas power plants as just it's a capacity market. And so they're putting in place a natural gas capacity market because they want to support their local business. And then secondly, and that's a different piece of legislation. So there's that. This is a new one which they're attacking permitting, and they've added like at least 3 items that I saw which were onerous, and some of which might make projects unfeasible. They say you must get signatures from all people on a document if you're to build a project. Well, what if somebody doesn't want to sign? I mean, it doesn't say they have to approve it, because first off, they don't get to approve it, but it says they have to sign for it. I don't know if that's going to last in a court. I think this might just be grandstanding. I don't know anything about the law on this level, but they're really just trying to kill some solar. And the 3 rules that were mentioned, one of them was retroactive permits, and then forcing asset owners to upgrade their capacity, or to even take capacity offline if these retroactive permits change, say, setbacks from neighboring or occupied areas. And so they're, it's the question is, how do we stick it to our competition? Because this is just standard business that's occurring here, and it's fossil fueled business.
As Ryan Kennedy points out in this story, the Texas State Senate voted 21-9 in favor of SB 624 that would place significant permitting restrictions and fines on solar and wind energy projects in the state. And then there's a companion bill heading to the House for approval. What's noteworthy also is that, according to Advanced Power Alliance, I'm not familiar with that organization. Is that a trade organization? Sounds like it. Projects that in 2024, renewable generation in ERCOT will deliver $6 billion in net system operating cost savings and more than 18 gigawatts of reliable capacity contributions. So we're talking about significant savings for the Texas economy, right? And this is not just, it's savings for consumers, it's savings for business owners, of course, it's earnings for clean energy companies, manufacturing jobs. This is really not good for the Texas economy. I have no idea why the governor would not veto this bill, but we will see.
Well, he won't. He's on the oil and gas side. Texas politics permeates nationally because they're the number 2 state, and
it is very ironic, right, that people in Texas, these legislators, would want to impinge on the rights of landowners to develop wind and solar on their land, because it's good for those landowners, right? It's good money that they're making. Today they're grazing, perhaps, if they're lucky. There's a lot of arid land in Texas, a lot of grassland, a lot of semi-desert land, scrubland, and there's a lot of oil fields. If you go to West Texas on Google, you just see these pock marks, boom, 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 right, that are all these oil derricks. And that's a big impact on the ecosystem. So why on earth they think it's good for the economy to slow down the clean energy transition in Texas is beyond me. And I just cross my fingers that this doesn't happen, but we will see.
Yep.
Well, we got to wrap up the show, John. Please check out all of our content at cleanpowerhour.com. Give us a rating and a review on Apple and Spotify. That is the best thing you can do to grow the show. and get more people in the know about the clean energy transition and all the wonderful stories that we're bringing you week in and week out. Please also subscribe to our YouTube channel and give us a thumbs up and tell your friends about the show. How can our listeners find you, John Weaver, Mr. Commercial Solar Guy?
Commercial Solar Guy is my favorite place to be found. It has a contact us page, and we also have a Twitter account, and we have a LinkedIn account. We're located in New Bedford. We build stuff, we consult with stuff. I guess contact us page. Trying to make a better website so that we can, communicate more clearly what we can do, and just grow the company. We got a lot of growth coming, Tim. I was working on ChatGPT with my business plan, Tim, and I'm hoping to become a tiny bit more organized and in place so that I can. We get a lot of inbound phone calls, dude, and so if I could figure that out, we can grow as a company. So commercialsolarguy.com, whatever help you need, we try to offer it, but we really want to build stuff in Mass and Rhode Island. That's my pitch.
Very good. Well, I'm Tim Montague. Let's grow solar and storage. Take care, John.